It's funny how no matter how much we try to plan for the future, there's always this nagging worry.
Yeah.
Will my kids turn out okay? Will I reach my goals?
Right.
It just feels like this very universal, human struggle.
It definitely is. As humans, we crave certainty and reassurance, especially when it comes to things we really care about.
Yeah,
Do
totally. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're taking a look at this lecture by this scholar, Nouman Ali Khan, and he kind of delves into this very human desire for control, particularly from a faith-based perspective.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that he challenges this right from the start.
Okay.
He kind of suggests that this illusion of control we often cling to, that it's actually a distraction from a deeper truth.
Okay.
And he reminds us that Allah doesn't promise us specific outcomes in this life, no matter how much we plan.
He uses a really powerful example to illustrate this point.
Yeah.
The story of baby Moses.
Yes. The story of baby Moses. I mean, no human could have predicted,
Right.
that this tiny baby sent down a river in a basket with no apparent plan would ultimately topple an entire empire.
Totally.
It's just this amazing reminder of just the unpredictable nature of life's course.
Totally. It makes you realize that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most profound outcomes.
Right.
But this idea of surrendering control, especially in the context of faith, can be a tough pill to swallow.
Absolutely. But, Khan isn't advocating for fatalism here.
Okay.
He's not saying that we shouldn't plan or make an effort.
Right.
But it's more about kind of a shift in perspective.
Okay.
We can and should strive to make wise decisions, but ultimately the results are in Allah's hands.
So it's more about recognizing the limits of our planning and learning to trust in a higher power.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really relatable dilemma that he tackles in this lecture.
Okay.
Which is parenting.
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets personal for a lot of us. I mean, who hasn't stressed about giving their kids a strong Islamic upbringing,
Right.
protecting them from negative influences?
Right.
It's a constant worry, I think, for a lot of parents.
And Khan argues that this obsession with controlling our children's upbringing can be misguided.
Okay.
And he uses some powerful examples from the Quran to illustrate this point.
Okay.
For instance, the story of Prophet Yusuf, who was kidnapped as a child, separated from his family,
Right.
and yet grows up to be this man of incredible integrity and leadership.
It's almost like a counter-narrative to the idea that we have to perfectly control every aspect of our children's lives to ensure that they turn out okay.
Precisely. It raises the question of, is there this inherent capacity for goodness
Right.
within us,
Yeah.
even if we don't have the ideal upbringing?
So what about the flip side of that? What about those kids who do have what seems like the perfect upbringing but still stray from the path? He addresses that too, right?
He does. He brings up the story of Prophet Nuh, who, despite being a prophet chosen by Allah,
Right.
couldn't even guide his own son to truth.
Wow.
It's kind of a stark reminder that we can't force faith,
Yeah.
no matter how hard we try.
Wow. That's a powerful example. And it really reinforces that idea of surrendering control, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And, Khan drives this point home with a statement that I think every parent, or really anyone who struggles with control, should reflect on.
Okay.
And he says, we don't even control our own guidance,
Wow.
let alone our children's.
That's a pretty profound statement. It makes you wonder if we can't control the future, even for those we love most.
Right.
Where do we find genuine guidance?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the next section of, Khan's lecture,
Okay.
where he explores a crucial element of faith prayer.
Okay.
But before we jump into that, did you have any thoughts or reflections on this idea of control based on what we've discussed so far?
I'm struck by the contrast between these two examples from the Quran. Prophet Yusuf thriving despite the difficult circumstances.
Right. And Prophet Nuh, who couldn't even guide his own son.
Right.
It really highlights the complexity of this issue.
Yes.
It's not as simple as saying, if you do X, then Y will happen.
Right.
There are so many factors at play.
Exactly. And I think that complexity is something we need to be more comfortable with.
Yeah.
We live in a culture that's obsessed with finding quick fixes and easy answers. But when it comes to matters of faith and personal growth, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay. So with that in mind, let's kind of dive into Khan's thoughts on prayer and how it connects to this idea of finding guidance.
Sounds good.
All right. So Khan starts by analyzing a verse that describes this useless generation and their first downfall. they wasted prayer.
Okay.
Now, he clarifies that this doesn't necessarily mean that they were skipping prayers altogether.
Right.
So what does it mean to waste prayer? What's he getting at here?
Khan suggests that true prayer is about reaching a state of complete surrender and humility before Allah.
It's not just about going through the motions.
Right.
It's about having an experience that transforms you from the inside out.
Okay.
And he uses this imagery of falling into sujud to explain this concept.
So for our listeners who may not be familiar with this term, sujud is the act of bowing down in prayer, placing your forehead on the ground. But Khan's emphasizing a deeper meaning here.
Exactly. He's saying that sujud isn't just a physical act. It's a state of being. A complete submission to a higher power. It's about reaching a point of such profound humility and awe that you're completely swept away by the experience.
He connects this to some really powerful moments described in the Quran.
Yes.
Like the magicians witnessing Prophet Musa's, that's Moses' miracles, and instantly falling into sujud.
Yes.
Overwhelmed by the power of Allah, or the jinn hearing the Quran for the first time and being so captivated they stop everything to listen.
Yes. Those are such vivid examples. And, they raise an important question for us. What's stopping our prayers from having that kind of impact? Why aren't we moved in the same way?
That's a great question to ponder, isn't it? What would it take to reach that level of sincerity and connection in our own prayers?
Exactly.
But before we get too deep into that, let's take a quick pause here and come back for part 2, where we'll explore Khan's thoughts on the dangers of following desires.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about prayer. Specifically, this idea of wasting prayer, as Nouman Ali Khan puts it. But he doesn't stop there. He connects this to another concept that I think resonates with all of us. The challenge of following desires.
It's fascinating how he links these two ideas. After discussing the useless generation who wasted prayer, he dives into the next verse, which describes them as following desires. And Khan suggests that this is a recipe for disaster, not just on an individual level, but for society as a whole.
It's interesting because on the surface, those two things, prayer and desire, seem pretty distinct. But the way Khan connects them makes you realize how intertwined they really are.
Exactly. It's like there's this tension between, our desire to connect with the divine, to seek guidance through prayer, and then this other powerful force within us that pulls us towards worldly desires.
So how does Khan explain this pull towards desire? How does he frame it in the context of his lecture?
Well, he draws some pretty chilling parallels to our modern consumerist culture. Think about the constant bombardment of messages telling us to just do it. To indulge every impulse, to buy the next shiny object. It's like we're being conditioned to prioritize instant gratification over everything else.
It's true. We live in a world that glorifies instant gratification. And it's easy to get caught up in that cycle. Especially with social media constantly showcasing everyone's seemingly perfect lives and their latest purchases. It can feel like we're always falling short.
And Khan points out that this constant chasing of desires can have some pretty grim consequences. He talks about how this pursuit often leads to a cycle of disappointment. Because desires, by their very nature, are never truly satisfied. And this can contribute to a rise in, depression, anxiety, even substance abuse, as people try to numb that feeling of emptiness.
That's a really insightful point. It's like we're searching for happiness in all the wrong places and ending up more miserable as a result.
Exactly. And it's not just the personal consequences that Khan highlights. He also talks about the societal decay that can result from unchecked desire. And we see this in the exploitation of others for profit. The pursuit of wealth and power at any cost. And the erosion of moral boundaries.
So Khan's arguing that this unbridled pursuit of desires actually contributes to a decline in ethical behavior and a blurring of right and wrong.
Precisely. And it gets to a point where, we become so desensitized to fulfilling our desires. That we lose the ability to even recognize what's truly harmful or, goes against our values.
That's a pretty bleak picture he's painting. It makes you wonder if there's any hope for breaking free from this cycle.
Well, amidst all of this, Khan does offer a glimmer of hope. He reminds us that no matter how far we've strayed or how caught up we've become in this pursuit of desire, there's always the possibility of repentance, of turning back to faith and righteous action.
So it's not about achieving some unattainable state of perfection.
Right.
But about recognizing when we've gone astray and making a conscious effort to realign ourselves with our values.
Yes, it's about acknowledging our imperfections and striving for continuous improvement.
Okay.
Not expecting, overnight transformations. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
How does this idea of repentance resonate with you?
I think it's a really powerful concept, especially in a world that often feels so unforgiving. The idea that we can always choose to change course, to make amends, and to seek forgiveness is incredibly liberating.
It is. And it ties back to that concept of control that we were discussing earlier. We can't control the past, and we can't always control the outcomes of our actions.
Right.
But we can control our response to our mistakes and our willingness to change.
So it's about focusing on what we can control, which is our inner state, our intentions, and our commitment to doing better.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the crucial role of prayer.
Okay.
If prayer can truly transform us, as Khan suggests, then it can also empower us to break free from this cycle of desire. And to make more conscious choices that are aligned with our values. But before we delve deeper into that, let's take a quick pause here. We'll continue this discussion in part 3, where we'll explore how prayer can guide us towards a more fulfilling path.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground, from the illusion of control to the dangers of unchecked desires. But where does prayer fit into all this? How does it help us navigate these challenges and find a path forward?
That's the question Khan leads us to, isn't it? And I think this is where his insights become really practical. He suggests that prayer, when done with sincerity and intention, has the power to transform us from the inside out. It's not just about asking for things. It's about cultivating a deeper connection with the divine.
So it's about shifting our focus from, external outcomes to our internal state.
Exactly.
From trying to control the world around us to working on our own hearts and minds.
Precisely. And Khan argues that this inward transformation is what ultimately empowers us to break free from that cycle of desire and make choices that are aligned with our values, even when it's difficult.
That makes sense. But it still feels a little daunting, If we're talking about tackling big issues like consumerism, corruption, the erosion of moral values, it's easy to feel like one person's actions, one person's prayers can't really make a difference.
I understand that feeling. But Khan reminds us that even small acts of faith, kindness, and courage can have a ripple effect, inspiring others and gradually shifting the tide. Remember the story of the jinn hearing the Quran for the first time?
Right. It wasn't some grand spectacle, but a small group captivated by the truth they encountered.
Exactly. And that encounter had a profound impact, spreading outward to their entire nation.
Wow.
It's a reminder that even seemingly insignificant actions can spark change, especially when they're rooted in sincerity and conviction.
That's a really encouraging thought. It reminds me of the magicians who witnessed Prophet Musa's miracles and instantly fell into sujud.
Yes.
Even though it meant challenging the status quo and going against societal norms.
Yes. Their willingness to stand up for what they believed in, even when it was risky, is a testament to the power of genuine faith. And it shows us that real change often starts with individual transformation, with that deep inner shift that comes from connecting with something greater than ourselves.
So it's not about trying to control the future or force outcomes, but about focusing on our own growth and letting those actions ripple outwards, impacting the world in ways we may never fully comprehend.
Beautifully said. And I think that's ultimately the message of hope that Khan leaves us with. It's not about grand gestures or trying to manipulate the world around us. It's about cultivating inner peace, aligning ourselves with a higher purpose, and letting those actions flow outwards. Trusting that they'll have a positive impact in ways we may never fully understand.
So it's about recognizing the limits of our control while embracing the power we do have to choose how we respond to the challenges we face, how we live our lives, and how we contribute to the world around us.
Exactly. And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question that Khan poses. And I think it's one that we can all benefit from pondering. If we can't control the future, what is the most important thing we can control to cultivate inner peace and contribute to a better world?
That's a powerful question to end on. It really makes you stop and think about where our true power lies.
Yeah.
Not in trying to force things to go our way, but in aligning ourselves with something larger than ourselves and letting that guide our actions.
It's a beautiful reminder that even amidst uncertainty and chaos, there's this profound sense of agency in choosing how we respond, how we live, and how we contribute to the world around us.
And with that, we leave you to contemplate that very question. What will you choose to control?